We just got some pretty interesting news around Cyberpunk 2077, and likely we're going to get some even more interesting news around this game later in the week. Just recently, the CEO of CD Projekt gave an interview with a Polish financial or business-focused news organization, this being fairly significant because it's the first public messaging they've really done since they actually delayed all of the content into 2022. If you don't recall, a little while back, they actually just updated their roadmap kind of quietly. There was no official statement around this, and this is the first time we're actually hearing somebody talk about that roadmap getting updated and all of the updates getting pushed to next year. And they even comment on the lawsuit that is ongoing, and we haven't heard much about that in a while. But even further, in just a couple of days is the CD Projekt Red earnings report, so we're likely going to hear more on all of this then. With that said, there are a couple of big quotes coming out of this one. So starting things off, one of the first questions the interviewer does ask is, what would you change if you could about Cyberpunk? And suggest some things like would they hold back the console version or other things they could do differently if the opportunity presented itself. The CEO here does regard Cyberpunk is their most ambitious project they've done thus far. New franchises have a lot of challenges and risks. And then we get a few sentences, which is really one of the big standout quotes. We're proud of many aspects of the game, but as we know, not everything went our way. Nevertheless, the awareness of the Cyberpunk brand that we have managed to build is huge. And the game universe, its characters, and detail have fans all over the world. We believe that in the long term, Cyberpunk 2077 will be perceived as a very good game, and like our other titles, it will sell for years, especially as the equipment will be more efficient and the game will be improved by us all the time, as well as the version for the latest generation of consoles. And he goes on to say how they learned a lot from the premiere of the game, but he doesn't really get into specifics as far as what regrets they have or how they would change things more specifically. I think one of the reasons he doesn't explicitly mention, let's say, holding back or never releasing on last-gen consoles are those ongoing lawsuits. So if he comes out and says it was a huge mistake to release on last-gen consoles, that could be a pretty big problem in regard to the shareholder lawsuit. But all of this taken together does seem to continue to push that narrative of the next-gen version of the game almost being a soft relaunch of sorts. Seems like there's a lot of investment and a lot of time going into this patch. The last major patch for Cyberpunk came out in August of 2021, a few months ago now. So it'll be interesting to see the scale of these first patches of 2022 and how much of a difference they really make in the game. Over the past 6 months or so, some of their messaging around these next patches have kind of been that they're going to go a bit further in improving features, not just fixing bugs. Now we have to see how much that actually entails. Like, is the cop AI finally going to be overhauled, or is it still just going to be tweaks or minor feature additions here or there? We don't really know, but it definitely seems like we should be getting more of that stuff going forward. Which, speaking of going forward, there also is a question around all of the updates and the next-gen version being delayed into 2022, where he does say, this year we will no longer be releasing any updates to the game. We are working intensively on the version for the latest generation of consoles, which will be released in the first quarter of 2022 with a major update, patch 1.5. And he does say how they postponed the next generation version of Cyberpunk 2077 off of the recommendation of their development team. And technically, that is the first time CDPR has officially commented on delaying all of those updates. It's really not much of a comment in its own right, but technically that's the first time they've really said anything substantial about it. And I find all of this pretty interesting. For context on that patch 1.5 comment, right now we are on patch 1.31, so hypothetically the first update of 2021 will likely be a very large one, or hopefully will be a very large one, considering it'll be about 5 to 6 months in the making, and that will be patch 1.4, and then hopefully in February or March we get patch 1.5, which will launch the next-gen version. That quote of them delaying the next-gen version based off feedback from their development team is really what people want to hear. That is the right answer in this instance, especially considering what happened with launch and how seemingly there were a lot of issues. I'm pretty wary to take that at face value. I think time will definitely tell, but it seems like at the very least that CD Projekt Red is actually taking their time with this one to try and get it right. Pushing all of their updates for 2021 and delaying the next-gen version out of 2021 is pretty huge. That means they're missing the holiday season. So as I've kind of mentioned before, I'm pretty hopeful that perhaps we get a few really large scale and really feature additive patches in the first few months of next year. And also all of those various free DLCs that they are working on and hopefully are also coming. And something else that's kind of a whole X factor with all of this that hasn't necessarily come into play yet, but could with some of these updates. A few months ago, CD Projekt Red did hire a bunch of modders to work officially on the game. These being some of the people that were creating the tools and the framework to create community mods for Cyberpunk. We don't know exactly what they're working on internally at CDPR, whether it be official mod support or something else entirely, but I just bring it up as something to keep in the back of your head as an interesting little thing that could pop up in the future again. But speaking of the next next-gen version, patching, and DLCs. They also go a bit into the amount of people working on Cyberpunk. It's mentioned how about 1,200 people work at CD Projekt in general, 660 of those being developers, and a third of them are on Cyberpunk updates and next-gen. I've seen a lot of people looking at this and kind of taking it out of context. They hear a third of CDPR is working on Cyberpunk patches and next-gen and be like, oh, so there's only a third of the company, but I don't think that's the full picture. What this would mean is about 220 people are working on Cyberpunk 2077 updates and the next-gen version, but that number is not including the people working on expansions. But the important part of this number is that they are moving more and more people onto the Cyberpunk expansions. A few months ago, we saw this chart. At this point, there's about 40% of people working on updates and the next-gen version. Now we're at about 30%, and that seemingly means that 10% of those developers have actually been shifted over to working on the first expansion for Cyberpunk. Now, is that a good thing, a bad thing? We don't really know, but there are hundreds of people still updating this game, still working on the next-gen version, and hundreds more working on the expansions for this game, which is a lot of freaking people. As far as the lawsuit goes, CDPR does mention how they actually filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit outright, and things are currently processing around that, although it's not clear if that's going to be accepted or declined, if the lawsuit will be moving forward, but at the very least it is still ongoing, and specifically being the shareholder lawsuit, where investors in CDPR were suing them for misleading them about the performance on last-gen consoles. Although obviously if their motion to dismiss gets accepted, that will just kind of throw out the lawsuit, at least for right now. That was the interview itself. There's a few interesting quotes in there, a few interesting things to see them actually talking about, also staying pretty vague in general. As I mentioned before, we are likely hearing more in the next couple of days. Their earnings call should be on this Monday if you're watching this video when it goes live, and I'll definitely cover whatever they say. But one of the other pretty big things going on with Cyberpunk right now are the Steam sales, whether it be around Black Friday or people just picking up the game for the first time in general. And what we're seeing with this is, one, a huge influx of players. On Steam itself, the game was 50% off for $30. Some retailers, you could actually buy physical versions for consoles for just $10, which at $10, this game is easy to justify buying even on a console. It's going to be way better if you're playing on a next-gen console. It's almost a requirement in some regard, but for $10, if you could handle the occasional 25 FPS, you could still power through on a last-gen console. And these Steam sales definitely seem to be pretty effective, because at least as far as the Steam player count goes, it's almost quadrupled over the past couple of days. As you can see now, we're hitting around 20,000 active players, and we were in the 6,000 to 7,000 range just a little while ago. But even further, a lot of people finally getting their hands on this game are discovering they actually really like it, as 84% of the recent reviews have been positive on Steam, and the overall review quality has actually gone up on Steam. It's always been pretty positive on Steam, but it's only getting more positive as more people play and try this game for the first time, which is really awesome to see. And it definitely suggests that that quote from the CEO earlier about how Cyberpunk 2077 will be perceived as a very good game is already kind of starting to become true. A few more major updates and things could really turn around. A big part of the narrative that has popped up with this and with a lot of people trying the game for the first time is, wait, why was everyone telling me this was garbage? And there's a couple of things to analyze on this front. On one hand, a lot of people were frustrated with CD Projekt Red more so than Cyberpunk itself, because there was some blatant lying and misleading with the quality of the game on last-gen consoles. But if you're playing on a medium to high-end PC, or perhaps even some low-end PCs, you can play the game pretty flawlessly. I ran into some minor bugs or some broken features, but largely you can play this game. Controversial releases of games tend to have this issue, where people conflate there being problems with the company with there being a ton of problems with the game. Cyberpunk definitely had a mix, but there was a lot of drama about what CDPR said and did. And although there were a lot of issues also with the game, the extreme issues were really reserved for last-gen consoles after the first couple of updates. For a while now, you could play through most of Cyberpunk. You'll still encounter bugs, almost certainly, because there's a bunch of dumb little things still lingering. But in general, if you're on the fence about buying this one, between the modding community on PC and it actually being on sale, I would definitely say it's an easy pickup at $30. You'll probably have some fun with it. With that said, that's a bit of an update as far as those statements by the CEO, the recent sales, and why there's kind of this weird dichotomy of people loving the game despite everyone saying it was horrible. I'll keep you guys up to date. I have a few more Cyberpunk videos planned, including another updated look at the modding scene, what's been happening there. With that said, as always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all later.